Good evening. I'm attorney Lawrence Berliner. I'm an attorney in the field of special education law. And tonight, I'm also with our co-host, Jane Faherty, who's the director of the JumpStart program at the Jewish Community Center in Stamford, a special education advocate, and she'll review some of her backgrounds. We also have two very special guest speakers tonight, Caryl Frankenberger and Hocking. We'll get to them momentarily. To go over tonight's webinar topic, Discovering Social and Emotional Learning. Before we begin, I have a couple of disclaimers. We've put our contact information, and hopefully it's available in the chat section of the computer screen. We ask that we have many questions. I can't emphasize too many's, but we have many questions about tonight's topic, and often we have questions that come in during the webinar. We ask that you place the questions in the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your computer screen, not in the chat section. This webinar is being recorded, and whatever's in the chat section is recorded. Whatever in Q&A is not. So we try to maintain privacy, and that we ask, that your questions be as general as possible, so as many people can benefit. Jane and I and our two guests are based here in Connecticut. We have guests from other countries and certainly from other states, but most of our information is based upon what happens here in the state of Connecticut. So you need to check your own local jurisdiction for any variations on the law, policies, or practices. As I mentioned before, the webinar is being recorded. A copy of the webinar will be provided to each person who is registered. The information on this webinar does not constitute specific legal, educational, or professional advice regarding you or your child's circumstances, and should not be relied upon as such. The webinar does not establish an attorney-client relationship with attorney Lawrence Berliner, myself, or a professional relationship with Jane Faherty, the Stamford Jewish Community Center, JumpStart program, Hocking, or Caryl Frankenberger at Frankenberger and Associates. By signing up, you have agreed to receive emails about future webinars and events from the Stamford Jewish Community Center and the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner, LLC. This is being recorded on Zoom, which is a third-party provider and not an agent of or associated with the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner, LLC, the Stamford Jewish Community Center, or Frankenberger and Associates. As I mentioned, this webinar is based upon Connecticut law, Connecticut practices, and to the extent federal law and federal policies. And with that, Jane, it's good to see you. I want to also thank everybody who's returning, because our last webinar date was canceled. I think we were supposed to have storms and power outages. So those that are coming back, we thank you. Those who are registering for the first time, we welcome you as well. So Jane, what's new with you?
Hi, it's lovely to be back for our fourth year. I can't believe that we'll be doing this for 4 years, Lawrence, as a webinar series come March. The time is flying by, as is the year. It's great to be back. So I am the executive director of two classrooms called JumpStart. One is located in the Stamford JCC. The other is located in the Maritime Odyssey Preschool, located in Norwalk. The classroom environment supports children with developmental delays and disabilities. Most of the children are referred to us from birth to 3 and exit the program on their 3rd birthday, and I help the transition then into the public school and advocate for those students. In addition to that, I have my own practice as an advocate and advocate for children throughout the public school, whether in elementary, middle, or high school. And I work as an advisor for the Suze Mulgrew Foundation and enjoy working and collaborating with different community partners and supporting families in a plethora of ways, whether it's with recreational or social activities as well. But it's delightful to be back. It's been a very busy year already. A lot of families and students are struggling. The COVID and hangover of COVID is a lack of resources, educational resources, as well as related service providers. And that clearly is having an impact on a lot of students, socially, emotionally, as well as academically. So even though we might be through the pandemic, we are now dealing with the residual of that, despite it being 4 or so years later. So it's a real delight to have Carolyn and Erica here with us tonight to share their knowledge and their expertise and to give us more insight in terms of what they do and what they have to offer. So Carol, tell us about Frankenberger Associates and how you got interested in social learning, please.
Yes, I'm Caryl Frankenberger. I'm the Executive Director of Frankenberger Associates, and we offer families and their children a wide range of services from tutoring, executive function tutoring, social skill programs, brain training, etc. And we have always worked with children who have social communication issues. But we began to formalize our thinking around 4 years ago, and we started to create groups for young children, middle schoolers, high schoolers, young adults. And they were successful, and we learned a lot from them. But as we went through them, we realized that it would take us 7 or 8 weeks to really understand who our students were, and that each one had various needs, even though we tried our best to group students to the best of our abilities so that they would have similar profiles. It was very challenging, and that's when we came upon the idea of doing individualized social emotional learning. And that sounds sort of counterintuitive that it would be one-to-one, but it has been really fabulous because what we're able, and we have a parent, our program is parent assisted. So we work with the student, we work with the parent, we do a couple of check-ins. But what we were able to do is really look at what are the prescient issues for each individual, and then really hone in on those skills, provide students with strategies, give them homework for them to do outside of our sessions, check in with them to see that they did what we've asked them to do, and it's all very collaborative in nature. And we found that, lo and behold, one-on-one just proved to be a richer experience. And then from there, we can put them into groups because now we really know them, and now we can really focus when they're all together, 4 or 5 students, they're together, we can really get at the heart of what's going on. So it's been a really interesting journey, and I'm really glad that we pivoted from doing groups initially to one-on-one. I think it was the right thing to do, and we're just moving forward. So that's how we got involved, and that's what we're doing.
I think the key word that you used there was collaboration. And I love the way that you have the parents involved. This is something that you're bringing everybody in with the conversation and to prepare and help the student navigate their environment successfully before then bringing them into a larger environment. And I think that, as you said, is the key. And in terms of collaboration, so Erica, do you want to tell us your story and how you got involved working with Carolyn?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jean, that you spoke about the COVID hangover. That's the term was just spoke to me. I've taught both in the private and public school, as well as the home setting through most of my professional career as a special education teacher. And I was part of that COVID hangover. So I was, both a special education teacher at one point of that time period, then an interventionist in the high school setting. And that brought me to Frankenberger, that brought me to Caryl, that brought me to, this work that we're doing together right now. Currently, I act as the social learning director at Frankenberger Associates. And really that work developed, I would say probably 12 years ago when I took almost a small survey of this wonderful support group that I was working alongside with families on the shoreline. And I was looking to see really what they were looking for, what the parents thought was missing most from their school programs, what was missing most from their students' daily lives. And I went into that survey, into that conversation, into that meeting thinking, I'm going to be the ABA therapist. That's where I'm headed. That's what these parents are going to want. They're going to want ABA for students with autism. And that was my preconceived notion. And after sitting with them and speaking with them, I learned all of them wanted social emotional learning. It was this pivotal period where the buzzword wasn't happening yet in education, but it was very much happening in these parent groups, mostly with these mothers who were very concerned about what was missing from their students' programming. That really allowed me this really amazing experience to open a small business in the Shoreline community up here, where I did social emotional learning, very small, very privately. And as Caryl had spoken about the group dynamic, that was always part of the work I did. It was mostly groups, but I did really enjoy that one-on-one time. I noticed the need for that. It allowed the connection with the parents to occur. It allowed, you know, the student to feel very safe and comfortable to explore the areas that they were struggling with. And during that time period, I was a huge follower of Michelle Garcia Winner. So I really dove into her workshops, her work, her curriculum. We utilize that still very much as one of our head areas, our you know, our primary curriculum that we use at Frankenberger, although we sprinkle in lots of different things. And that's what's so great about the work we do with social learning coaching. As Caryl had mentioned, it's so individualized. We'll really start with ideas, and we know exactly what our client, we think we know exactly what our client needs after we've done an intake with them, after we've done an assessment. But really, as we start working with our clients, that's when we get to say, wow, you need this, but you need this too. And we're going to work on that. You know, we're going to have these honest, open communication moments together to find out what you're comfortable with, set goals. And as Caryl had mentioned, the checking component is a wonderful part of the work we do, because we get to work on accountability, you know, every week, you know, almost not daily, but we get to really see how our clients are doing outside of their sessions. I think that in terms of my background, the biggest thing too that we were just talking a little bit about is the parent component, is how to effectively work with parents. And one of the things I think I learned in the public school setting was that idea, was thinking really about what the parents were looking for, why they felt the way that they felt. And that really always helped the work that I did with students to make the best goals, to serve them in a way that, you know, they were getting what they needed. But I also knew that um, I also understood why the parents were feeling the way that they felt. That was always very important to me. I think that's mostly the story as of now. It's unraveling, it's developing, as Caryl said. You know, we're doing all these wonderful groups now with the clients. So the work right now is just really that idea of, you had said the COVID hangover. It's almost like it was perfect timing, because now is such a good time to be doing this with the students that we get to be doing it with.
As I was doing some research when we were planning, although Jane advocacy practice and my legal practice are primarily focused on children with special needs, at least here in Connecticut, state law is requiring this kind of service for all children, regular ed, special ed, elsewhere. And it's very important that we have these resources out there, because I'm listening to Caryl and Erica speak, and I'm trying to recall when this has come up in my PPT meetings, and I can't remember one meeting where this has come up. I'm sure it has, but it's very, very important, as Jane pointed out, since COVID-19, the COVID-19 hangover, all the anxiety that we are experiencing today. And when I was reading one article, so it was sort of the question, why aren't we teaching social and emotional learning? And the author of the article said, well, look, when a child doesn't know math, we teach them math. So because math is not a naturally acquired skill, and that's what I would say with social and emotional learning, it is especially today something that needs to be taught in and outside of school.
Yeah, it was so, you know, poignant that you said that the direct teaching has to occur across the board. My own child, who is in a wonderful school. Today, something happened in his classroom, and he came right into the car and he told me about it. And then his teacher followed up with an email, and it's all social emotionally based. It's all about the act of, being kind and being able to communicate when you need to. Um, the idea of reaching out and supporting people. So Larry, it's so timely, and it's so important across the board, not just for students with special needs.
I think empathy is going to be a buzzword of 2024 with all the unrest that we are all feeling, and seeing and observing, particularly on the newsreels. So I think that, and Erica, this is to you, like in terms of early childhood learning, what about a young child with empathy? How can we guide young students, but also maybe us adults? I think we need it more maybe than some of the youngsters to tap into that intuition. And how can we develop that empathy muscle? And then how can we use it in the moments that it might be hard to grasp when we're overwhelmed or feeling anxious?
Yeah, well, very basically, and Larry was just discussing this idea of discrete teaching of skills that students might not know what they are. They might not know that they need support with them. So luckily with early childhood learning, we're able to teach empathy, and we're able to put that as a forefront of our curriculum when we're working with that age group, sharing and being kind and recognizing how people are feeling. So I think children can be guided to, learn about empathy through direct teaching of concepts surrounding it. Parents can engage their young learners to understand what's happening in the world around them just by having conversations and stopping to notice. There's always something happening. There's always an emotion occurring. So having those moments of pause, I think with your children is very important, and getting them to say first, it's always important for them to identify their own emotions as well. It's not only about the way people are feeling around them. They might be responding to something. So being able to talk about emotions is going to be very important when teaching empathy. I think the idea of intuition, that's a little bit more complex. That's a little bit more difficult. And that might come with time. That's going to come with experiences. I think it's also going to come with confidence. As children learn to become more confident, they're going to learn to be able to trust their intuition. I think as adults, we're still working on that. That's something that I talk about constantly with social emotional learning. There's no end, there's no done, there's no mastered in most of it, because we're constantly trying to work on it as adults. So the idea of intuition, I think, really goes into just helping students become confident with their choices, helping students become confident with their boundaries, being able to feel confident in saying something doesn't work for them. That's probably the best way to get at intuition. But a lot of that has to come naturally with upbringing and time, I think.
Our state law in Connecticut requires social emotional learning for students commencing fourth grade through the end of high school. And one of the questions we had come in was, what about the younger child, the early childhood preschool child, the one who's in kindergarten through third grade? Is it too young to teach empathy? Is it too young? Is an age that's too young to teach social skills, kindness?
No, that's the beauty of it. I think that the earlier the better. And Jane, I'm sure with your experience with birth to 3, you can see that and support that. But the idea of it starts very, very young. The act of feeling something because somebody's experiencing something else. That's something that happens in infancy and young toddlerhood. So I think the earlier the better for that, for sure.
Some of the easy ways. So I was just going to say, for parents, when the child is so young, is literature and music and nursery rhymes. And there's some really wonderful literature out there for the younger students that parents can engage in those conversations through stories and storytelling as well. And that can be something you can share together, with one child, but also with with a number of siblings that you might have too.
I was going to say our occupational therapist works with very young students, kindergarten through 4th grade. And I watch her and she's playing games with them and teaching them that it's okay to lose and it's okay to win and how to play fairly and how not to have a tantrum or how not to put your hands on other kids and really how to interact with your peers. And it's remarkable. The younger that they are, the faster they learn. And, the more progress they make. So as Erica said, it's just never too young to start.
Yeah.
So,
And it's
so
oh,
I was just going to say, Carol, but how would you help a student identify and recognize within themselves that they need help with social learning?
Well, I think as Erica said, it starts really with a conversation. The parent starts with a conversation. And I think you will hear your child say certain things, maybe that they don't have any friends or there was nobody to sit with at lunch. So listening carefully to your child and having them sort of identify what is a challenge without saying to them what is challenging for you. Who do you want to hang out with? Do you want to join a group? Do you want to sit with somebody at lunch? What happens there? And having just an open, really open conversation. Some kids don't want multiple friends initially. They can't handle it. So they want one friend. Well, then let's help, get that. Let's help this child have one friend that they can go to and have lunch with rather than sit by themselves. Are they willing to come out of their comfort zone? Because they have to be willing to take some risks. So as you're talking, you need to see, where are they in that process? But I think having a conversation, so often we hear a student say to their parents, I like to be alone. I'm fine being alone. And we know that that's just not the case because friendships are really the center of our world. Relationships are what makes us typically happy, not all the time, but to be alone is not natural. So when our kids say that, it's a red flag. We have to dig deep, but I think it starts with having a conversation. And Erica, you might be able to add to what I've said.
I think it's exactly right and true. The idea of I think we're going to constantly come back to this idea of open and honest communication because social emotional learning, there has to be communication. There has to be that ability to effectively speak with people and also listen with people. And also the idea of, I think, presenting yourself as having vulnerabilities, presenting yourself as not knowing the answer or not always doing it right. That's always really helpful for clients when I'm working with anybody who's struggling to identify things going on with them, is presenting things that are happening with me. It's always there. It's always an option to, bring yourself into the equation to help support somebody else who might feel like it's only happening to them.
Sounds like that's part of the definition of empathy.
Mhm.
We had a question come in this evening. I've heard 2 out of the 4 words. Have you ever heard of something called a developmental social emotional delay? I'm familiar with a developmental delay. Has anybody heard of that phrase?
I think it would just be in regards to a developmental delay in the social emotional area, possibly.
Okay. Is there ever a situation where, despite your best efforts to teach social and emotional learning skills, you're just not able to get, through to the child or adult, depending on who you're dealing with?
I think that that's always a possibility. The idea of feeling like we can't get through. The I'm empathizing from a parent's perspective. That is felt more often than from my perspective as somebody who works as an educator and now works as a social coach. I get I kind of get the luxury of getting through. But in terms of, the things that come up as challenges when working, it goes a lot to what Carol was saying with defensiveness and students that feel very affected, impacted, and it's just been a really difficult path for them. So I think it's really important to consider, this is going to go back to empathy, right? It's going to be important to always consider what their perspective is. Why is it not working? Why is the wall there? And what can we do to help bring it down? What can we do? And it might be very complex, as Jane and I were speaking about prior to this meeting, that this whole idea, there's so many factors that can impact this. So I realize that's a pretty lengthy answer, and it's pretty lofty for somebody to have to do that. But I also think that if there's that communication, if there's that understanding, there's typically a way to kind of get past that barrier. But I do see it's hard. I've worked with all different students and in all different settings. The setting can always be a barrier.
We're just shifting the age a little bit, Carol. And we had a question before the webinar tonight, and somebody would like to know how to support a middle schooler, which is typically a difficult age in and of itself, but support a middle schooler with ADD, anxiety, social difficulties. What kind of resources or advice would you give those parents?
I'm going to let Erica answer that, because we talked, and it was one of my questions, but we talked about it earlier today, and I think she's better able to do that, if that's okay.
Yeah. The middle school age group that you were just talking about, Jane, it is tough. I think meeting this with a bit of grace, recognizing the period of time is very hard. I have a middle schooler that I'm raising right now. So I recognize that. I recognize that I work with middle schoolers who have various disabilities and social learning challenges, some which are on the list of that question. So just giving yourself some grace to say, this is a very hard period. There's so much going on. But I also do know that the time period too presents so much more freedom and openness in the area of social emotional learning. Teachers are no longer telling students, we're all friends. We're going to treat everybody kindly. Everybody in this classroom's a friend. That is gone. That's out the window. The rules have totally changed and shifted. So now we have these students who are just learning new roles. And a lot of times students who struggle with social emotional learning do not pick up on new rules. They don't pick up on the norms. So that's a whole other part of this tough time for them. So I think one thing that's really important, and this is a personal and also professional piece for me, is monitoring screen time as much as possible, being able to have open relationships with your middle schooler around their technology use. I think that stands for any population, but most importantly for this population that we're looking at, because it's a period of time where it can be really detrimental to their social emotional wellness. Getting them to engage in extracurricular activities is always going to be helpful. I recognize that is very hard. That's one of the things that we work with our clients on through a long period of time to do. That's sometimes experts have to be called in to make that happen. But if families can support that, that's always going to help support the social emotional development of that particular client or child. I think getting in touch with the school systems is also really important. Reaching out to the people that are there to help them, for a family, for a parent to realize, there are people on the other side that I can reach out to. This goes back to open and honest communication, being honest with those families and letting them know what it is that's bothering you. That was always helpful to me as a case manager, when I knew exactly what was happening, why the parent was feeling the way they were feeling. It really helped me to work with the student more effectively. And I think that this period of development is so wonderful for students to know they have choices now. They can choose who they want to be friends with. They can choose where they want to go. And as parents, we can allow them to make those choices with our guidance. We can allow them to talk about what they want to engage in, what extracurriculars they want to do, and have discussions about who they want to be friends with. This is a really nice time for them to develop that idea that they have control over that at this point. So I hope that helps with that that family. I know that with the diagnosis of social anxiety, there's more that's going to come in. All of those things I just mentioned are going to be very hard. So I think making sure there's a mental health provider who the family trusts, reaching out for that support if needed. And I also think that we're looking at somebody with ADHD as well in that question. With a student with ADHD who is exhibiting social learning challenges, it's extremely important that they get support with accountability and calendaring, social calendaring, I call it. These are the children who don't recognize the need to make plans, to keep plans, to follow up on plans, because that's how their friendships are going to flourish. A lot of the clients I work with will have something, they'll do something with a peer and they'll have a blast and they think it's done, like there's nothing else they have to do. So I think for students with ADHD, it's very important for parents to be able to help them be held accountable for the choices they're making, the friendships that they're developing, and that can always be supported through calendaring and organizational strategies from families.
We've covered preschool, middle school. We have a couple of questions for the older student and young adult from approximately age 18 to 23. That's the range in the questions, but I'm not going to stop off at age 23. Are there any strategies, techniques that should be used for the older student, high school, end of high school, entering their young adulthood?
I think at that point, it's really important to recognize all of the developmental changes that have occurred. So everything's really going to change in terms of communication with that client. They're now most likely in charge of a lot of their decision making. So it comes back to that accountability piece and really helping support them staying accountable to their social goals. But having said that, it's not too late for them to learn new things. I work with plenty students in that age group, 18 to 23 exactly, who are constantly learning new things with our work and saying, wow, I can't believe nobody ever taught me these before. If I knew this back then, I would have been able to do more things. So being able to figure out how to effectively teach those students is important, but also not to feel like you can't go backwards and teach some things that might seem a little bit basic. I think it's appreciated by the right population. They want that help.
One of the beauties of working with college students, and recently, within the past couple of years, we've been working with adults up to, 50-year-old adults who have, executive function weaknesses or, ADHD and social skill challenges. But one of the beauties is that typically the college population, they want the help. They really want to learn strategies in order to form relationships, in order to be able to go out and go to dinner with someone. So they're very ripe to learn the strategies, and they're really ready to apply the strategies. So when you have such a willing participant, unlike sometimes your high school students who can say, no, I'm fine, it's all good. The college students really seem to want this, and they apply it, and it's can be remarkable how it can change their lives.
We had an interesting question. We're talking about maybe students that are more self-aware that they need support in the social realm. What about the question was how to tell your child and when to tell your child that they have some kind of disability or that they have a need that needs to be addressed. At what point would you start that conversation, and how would you kind of navigate that with the child, but also as a family unit as well?
I'll just speak from an evaluator. I'm a psychoeducational diagnostician, so I see children of all ages and through young adults. And typically after an evaluation, I will do a wrap up with a parent for a couple of hours and go through the whole profile, the strengths, the challenges, really the whole picture of the student. And then I want to meet with the student and I want to share with them what their profile is, because it's really important. And at that time, I may say, with parent permission, you're dyslexic. Do you know what that is? And really explain. For younger kids, I use something called the Brain Building Book by Dr. Liz Angoff. It's a wonderful, wonderful book that explains to young kids that their brains are under construction and that they're always developing and creating new neural pathways. It's just a lovely book. But I think it's really important for students to know their strengths and their challenges, because how will they work with anyone who's going to try to help them if they really don't know? So I've worked with very young students, second and third graders, who I've said, you have a problem with language. And give them lots of examples. One of the things you said to me is you have a really hard time finding words. Well, that is a challenge for you. So we're going to work on word retrieval. I might not use that word, but I don't think that children are too young, maybe, kindergarten, first grade. That's really young to say you have a learning disability. And I don't know the exact age, to be honest, Jane. But I just know in my practice, even with the first and second graders, I am sitting down and talking to them and giving them lots of examples and using their examples as repeating their examples to them so that they really make sense. Yeah, so that's, do you want to
Carol
talk a
and
little
I
bit about
got to
ASD?
discuss this together, which was really interesting yesterday. We got to talk about, our ideas about when to tell clients and when to tell students. And um, there's so many different answers to this question, and it is so dependent on the student. We've also seen the idea of students hiding behind their labels and using their labels to say who they are, versus being able to identify things that they struggle with, because that's where their advocacy is really going to come through. If I work with my clients to navigate this, is okay, you have ADHD, okay, you have social anxiety. But when you go to work and you have to talk to your boss about what type of learner you are, you're not going to say that to your boss. That would not be the best way to communicate with your boss, that you need more time with something, or you are a visual learner and you need to be shown something. So I think there's this whole lesson that can occur about how to best communicate once you know what your brain looks like, how to bring that out to the world, how to show that to the world. Um, and I think the idea of speaking, Carol was referencing that book that she likes, and helping young kids to understand what their brains do. We do that a lot with social emotional learning, especially with the unthinkable characters that Michelle Garcia Winner had created for younger children, and getting them to identify that there's these parts of their brain. There's these characters that might overtake their brain. It doesn't mean that's their brain. It doesn't mean that's who they are. It means they're being impacted by something. Something's happening in the moment. And then we work to teach them strategies to combat those unthinkable characters, to kind of, get over those hurdles.
Yeah, it's really important that their learning challenges don't define them. This doesn't define you. This is just one piece. I just wanted to add two other things. I have seen students use their learning disability to their disadvantage because, oh, I can't do that, I have a learning disability. And that happens, more than I would like. But so we have to watch for that. They can't use this as an excuse. It's not an excuse. Let's figure out a way that you can compensate for being a slow reader. Let's look at audiobooks. Let's, if you have a hard time processing language, let's find a way for you to do that more readily. The other thing that I did want to say when I talked about evaluations, I always, after speaking with the parent and the student, I do a parent-student wrap-up so that we are all speaking the same language. And the student can't go back to their parent and say, she said this, and the parent can't say she. So it's all out in front and everybody's speaking the same language, and then they can move forward. And if I can help them, great. And I give them resources, they go to their school, etc. But I think that a whole wrap up is really important. So everybody needs to be on the same page.
Now, Carol and Erica, I understand you're doing this in an office setting or clinic setting. Is that correct? Your training and your skill building?
Our evaluations are in our office, but our social learning program is almost 100% virtual. We see kids from
Okay.
across the country and around the world.
Thank
Literally.
you. Because my question I was leading up to is how do you help once we go through the training and skill building, how do you help children or young adults generalize those skills? In other words, going from, in effect, the laboratory setting into the real life world setting, whether it's school, community, home, etc.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of the check-ins, the beauty of the working with families. A lot of times we set up systems of monitoring that our clients use to show us how they're doing in the real world. So it might be, and this can be something families can use. You know, families can work on generalization across the board with their kids when they know what their kids are working on, right? It's important for the families to be in the know and ask the schools about what is on the IEP, what do the goals look like, what are the social emotional strategies that they're learning. But the idea of generalization would be helping to support them doing it in the real world. So we get, you know, really nice opportunities to really know our clients, to know exactly who they're going to see the next day, who they're going to see the next hour. You know, if it's a student whose college schedule I know, and I see him at 10 o'clock and I know he's going to class at 11, then his carryover is going to be when you walk into class and you notice these three people that we've been talking about forming a relationship with, they have very specific carryover as to what they're going to do next. And that's a really nice thing about coaching is we can do that. It's not always that easy with a parent, right? So generalization for a parent has to be a little bit different. It has to be a little bit more, you kind of have to tiptoe around it a little bit more, especially with teenagers, because teenagers don't want their parents to tell them what to do. That comes up all the time with us when we're working with teens. The parents are like, they listen to you, but they don't listen to me. And that's really nice because we get to be the ones to ask them to do things. And most of the time, you know, we have a relationship, so it works. So I think parents of teenagers with generalization have to be extra careful. I think open, honest communication again is going to come into play, being, you know, honest about your intention. I know that sometimes if parents try and disguise it, it doesn't work. And teens can recognize that right away. A lot of times I work with parents that will say, if I use that type of language outside of like the therapy setting, they get mad. They're like, I'm not going to do that with you, mom. So it is extra challenging for parents to work on generalization, but it can be done. It can be done through media, technology, videos, listening to music. There's moments to have conversations there, watching movies. So there are opportunities for generalization.
And Larry, I mean, to talk about IEPs, Larry, I mean, as you know, one of the key things that we need to make sure that school districts do is that children have generalized and mastered skills. So, I mean, Larry, if you have some ideas in terms of how to encourage parents to hold school districts accountable for that too.
Yeah, and that's very, very important because I've had this monologue, it seems, for many years where the schools say we're only responsible for what happens in school. And I point out this is a learning laboratory, a training ground for life after school. You know, we're working on all the basic foundational skills, academic, social, emotional, whatever we're talking about, with the goal to generalize them to other settings to get ready for each next step in a student's life, you know, whether it's elementary school, middle school, high school, life after high school. And all of this is very, very important, that it's seamless to the extent possible, harmonized to the extent possible, which sort of dovetails with several questions. Are you ever, Carol or Erica, are you ever called upon to attend PBT meetings and contribute to goals and objectives or services as part of an IEP as it pertains to social and emotional learning?
I would not do that. That's not within really my purview. Erica, I'll let you speak for yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting. Through my work with Frankenberger, I've been able to attend PPTs as an executive functioning coach, because that's another role that I play with Frankenberger. I didn't really go into that because it wasn't part of what we're talking about tonight. So very much a part of the PPT process for our EF clients. In terms of PPTs as a social emotional coach, yeah, I mean, I've done that in the past, and it's something that I think is very beneficial when applicable to the program, right? When everybody's is on board, when it works, and the school is ready to hear how to effectively, work together to put social emotional learning goals into the student's plan. But I think too, Larry, you were talking about, generalization and the importance of that. That's huge in terms of the work that I think we do as a company as a whole. Is how do we help everybody that works with this client understand what it is that we're doing with them? So, we do sign consents to have conversations with schools when needed, and talk to outside providers when appropriate.
Erica, are there resources that if you are working with the district on social emotional, are there resources you should request to be part of an IEP to help with this area of development for students?
So I think in terms of resources, it's very much dependent on the need of the student. It's dependent on what the evaluations have shown. But I think it's just important in general to know it is part of the IEP, and to figure out what works best for your child. I've sat on PPTs before where specifically Michelle Garcia Winner's social thinking curriculum was written into the IEP because that was what was needed for the student. But then there's wonderful special education teachers out there, and teams and psychologists and social workers that can write really great goals. I think the idea is the measurability of the goals, the ways that the schools are looking to see that the students have mastered the goals. That's really important with social emotional learning, because it is so hard to quantify. It is so hard to measure. So one thing that's really important when looking at social emotional learning on an IEP is how the goal is being measured. Personally, I really like rubrics. I think that they're really effective for this type of work. So that's the part of the PPT process for, I think, the moment.
Are there different strategies? We've had several questions, for children or students with attention deficit disorder, autism, nonverbal learning disabilities, anxiety. If I missed a couple of categories, I apologize, but are there different strategies that are employed if somebody has a primary set of issues with attention or perspective taking or social skills or anxiety? Are there different techniques that are used in your training and your practice?
Well, there's certainly different, we do use different programs, as Erica said. The social thinking curriculum, everybody is peers certified. Peers is a program out of UCLA. If it's an evidence-based 14-week curriculum. So we do use that, but when you think about all of the labels that you just said, Larry, each one of those, is an individual, and within the NVLD world or the ADHD world, ADHD is going to manifest in your inattentive type, your hyperactive type, your combination type. There's just so many, so you can't choose there aren't a set of strategies that we give to each of those groups. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is, and one of the reasons we got away from groups that had sort of this prescribed curriculum, is we don't fit students into a program. We create a program around the student. And so for each of those, I think it would just depend. I mean, as an evaluator, I have lots of strategies, but it would be dependent upon the person, if that makes
There's
sense.
no one size fits all is what you're.
No, it really
Okay.
doesn't.
Thank
A
you.
really hard question to answer, I think. Erica, you may feel
I
differently.
agree. Yeah, and that's it's what makes the work beautiful, and it's also what makes the work very difficult at times, because as Caryl mentioned, there's no perfect equation. And it's so vast. But with the kind of luxury of being able to give it to the clients as needed, that's one of the best things about being able to provide social learning coaching. But yeah, it's vast, Larry. It's a big program. It's a big set of skills for, but I think it comes down to everybody can benefit from it. So doesn't matter disability or neurotypical, it's going to be something that's effective when you find out, the right equation for the student.
And that's the value of an organization such as yours, is that you are bespoke. What we're finding with a lot of the students is they have to fit into the public school program rather than the public school program being identified as fitting the student. And that really is the beauty of what you do. ABA therapy is, often used for those students with autism, but there are other different resources out there. Are there other programs that you've worked with or that you've navigated parents towards that might also be beneficial in addition to ABA?
It's interesting. I love ABA as a starting point for social learning, and I think it's such a wonderful way to discreetly introduce skills. And as I mentioned earlier, that was where I began. I began as an ABA therapist, and very discreet and very concrete and very black and white. And then I got to start teaching social thinking, and I got to meld them together, and it was so nice, the idea of teaching these really abstract skills, but through, behavior modification, because that is so important with this work. In terms of other tools, other strategies, other things that are helpful.
Erica, you can also go to the social thinking website, to the peers website. There's so many materials online. Yeah. There's videos, there's materials, there's worksheets, there's the only problem with that is if you use them in isolation and you just teach to that, you can't look at a video and then think that your son or daughter is going to learn the skill because they've seen the video. It needs to be role played and understood, and you need to do it 1 week and then you need to circle back the next week. I mean, it is a process that we're always going. I mean, sometimes we'll see a student for 8 weeks and they are just now entering a conversation, feeling confident, but it took 8 weeks for that to happen. Everybody is different. I also wanted to say, when we were talking about strategies, we have one social learning coach who has a student who really has a kind of black and white thinking and has a really hard time with idioms. So she begins every session with an idiom and a joke. And that's how she starts every single session. And the student loves it, and the coach loves it. And the student is beginning to pick up, oh, my teacher said an idiom today, and writing it down and figuring it out. So it just takes patience, time, using your intuition to what needs to be taught, and not just intuition. It's a process.
Yeah, and the professional journal I would use for idioms is Amelia Bedelia.
Yes, that's the best. That is so fun to teach young students about literal versus figurative language by using Amelia Bedelia.
We had 3 separate questions, and I'm just going to conflate them into one more as a comment, but if anybody wants to comment. One question is, they're young, they'll grow out of it. Another one, effectively, the school is not listening to the parent who has struggles just in general, and my child doesn't have an IEP. My comment is, sometimes it is developmental and they grow out of it. But if they're not growing out of it, you need to go to Frankenberger and Associates or other professionals out there to get information, not only to validate you, but to get recommendations that you could possibly take back to a school district. For a child whose parent is waiting for an evaluation, I always advise parents, do it in writing. I had a conversation with the principal, the social worker. I believe you, but there's no record of it. So if you're requesting an evaluation, a referral to a PPT meeting, do it in writing. There are some time limits, not many, but there are some time limits once there is a referral to special education, and how long a school district can complete an initial evaluation, schedule a PPT meeting, that's what we call them in Connecticut, or IEP meetings in other states, CSE meetings in New York, to review evaluations, parent concerns for enhancing their child's education, and the results of any public school or private evaluations. And the third piece was, if your child, if parent sees the child struggling in any area, whether it's social, emotional learning, math, reading, whatever, you need to bring these concerns to the school, starting with the teacher or the principal, the special ed director. In Connecticut, we have a guide to parents, a parent's guide to special education. It's available on the state Department of Education website, which is ct.gov, G-O-V, Department of Education. You'll see a list of publications. The parent's guide gives a user-friendly, in several languages, I might add, guide to special education, and parents should familiarize them. And if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't sound right, I tell parents, act on those feelings and that little voice in the back of your head, and ask the school district to do something. Show me that there are no issues, or act on my concerns with an evaluation, or I have a private report, a private evaluation. I'd like to have it discussed at a PPT meeting. So that's sort of 3 or 4 questions conflated into my comments. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I guess for some parents that know, they're getting the sense that there's something innately, their child is struggling. What are some of the telltales that the student is struggling with anxiety versus the student behaving in a more typical fashion? How can parents tease out the anxiety piece to maybe a student just going through a developmental phase? Any ideas on what parents should look, the telltales they should look for when it comes to anxiety?
I think, well, I always like to look at behavior, from a functional behavioral perspective, like the function of the behavior, looking at why, if they can identify why they think it's occurring. And that's always going to give you a lot of information, right? If you try and recognize what is the purpose of this behavior. Is it communication? Is it escape? Is it because it's self-stimulatory and they can't control it? In terms of anxiety, I think that's Larry's idea of going with your gut. I think as a parent, when you're thinking that it could be something more, to consider that and to trust that. That goes back to intuition from the beginning. It would be looking at, patterns that have occurred over a period of time that you can't answer another question as to why they're occurring. Puberty can have a big impact on the way children act, which can look like anxiety. But if there's a period of time that doesn't line up with that, then it would be smart for the family to look inward and see what they think is going on, if there's something. Caryl, I don't know if you have
being
anything
rejected
more
by your peers. I think when we talk about anxiety, it's important to distinguish between kids who have anxiety and kids who have an anxiety disorder. Because having an anxiety disorder is very debilitating, and it's over a 6-month period of time, and it's very significant. We all have anxiety. How that manifests is going to depend on the student or on the person. So I think we, as a parent, I would just want to keep in mind the extent to which this is impacting, and then try to figure out what is causing it. And oftentimes, if you dig deep enough, you'll find that it's a peer issue. It's the work is just too hard in school. They're asking me to read, and I can't read my material. Sometimes parents don't know that their kids are really struggling to read, because the child's not saying, I'm having difficulty. So sometimes kids will hide their weaknesses or their challenges. So asking a lot of questions, which is hard for the parent, for sure.
Unfortunately, we're getting towards the end of tonight's webinar. And for those who've asked questions that weren't answered, we apologize. We'll try to get to them if you ask them next time for next webinar, which I'll get to momentarily. So I want to thank Caryl and Erica for their insightful comments, wisdom, experience, and information about social emotional learning. I hope our guests tonight who logged in, or those who may be looking at this at YouTube, will find this information useful and relevant. Our next webinar will be on February 13th at 7 p.m. Our next speaker will be Dr. Muncie Cardos, who's an educational consultant, speaking about navigating the challenges of transition planning from high school and beyond for students with IEPs. We'll be covering transition planning, transition assessments, what are the goals for post-secondary education, employment, independent living. If you have found tonight's webinar informative, please register for our next webinar. We do have a YouTube channel from the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner for webinar recordings. Those who've signed up will get a copy of that. Jane and I will keep a watchful eye on special education issues that are coming up between now and our next webinar. And we look forward to getting questions this is for the older student. I might say starting at age 14 in Connecticut, we start transition planning. So I want to thank Caryl Frankenberger and Erica Hocking and Jane for collaborative efforts, and look forward to seeing people at our next webinar. I especially want to thank my daughter Rachel, who is off camera to my immediate right, who has put all of this together, because without her tremendous efforts to put this together, the four of us could not be here, along with everybody who's logged in. So those are my concluding remarks. Jane and Caryl and Erica, whenever you'd like to add your concluding remarks, please feel free.
I would just like to say that I think that an organization such as Frankenberger and Associates is not just a valuable resource and tool for parents, caregivers, and the students, but it's also a valuable resource for educators. And I think as educators, there's a value to us connecting and having conversations with experts such as Caryl and Erica to truly understand how when we're interacting with our students, how we can better serve them with these elements of their education, because it does impact every human being. And I think that we need to be more aware on the strategies, the tools that are available. So I would encourage not only parents and their children to explore these resources, but also educators to educate ourselves on what is available. And as Caryl said, they're learning all the time too. They've discovered things along the way that maybe we as educators, we need to be re-educated on different techniques and what is now available versus maybe what we practiced 4 or 5 or 10 years ago. And I think that there's a real value to us continuing our further education by tapping into the resources available in these organizations. So I want to thank you both for coming tonight. I look forward to seeing people again on February the 13th. So Caryl, if you'd like to have any closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was such a nice thing to say. And I have to say that we are very dedicated to educating educators. It's one of the things we do. We actually have a course, a 10-hour virtual course that we put together in order to do that. I'm not trying to sell that course. I'm just saying this is something that I believe in presentations like this. I believe in sharing information with parents, with educators. So thank you for including that. And thank you so much for having us. And Larry, thank you for having us. You, as I had said to you earlier, Larry, you are one of the most giving people of your knowledge, and you are incredibly knowledgeable about the law. And it's just a pleasure to work with you. And I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. It's always nice to hear nice things about me. I get too much criticism for doing what I do, I should say, but not from parents and not from you, Caryl or Erica or Jane. So And Erica, any concluding remarks?
Yes, I thank you all for having me here. It's been so nice being able to have this conversation so fluidly, and I love the questions that the parents have sent in to us. They were just very honest, and I could see all of you through the questions, and I really just thank you for being here and showing this interest in learning more for yourself and for your child.
Well, with that, we wish everybody, let's see, what's our next holiday? The President's Day. We'll see you on the
Oh,
13th.
yes, Valentine's.
Valentine's. Oh, that's a day
But
after.
we'll be there the day before, celebrating our love for everybody and everything.
Well, thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you.